In this video, I'm going to show you how to duplicate a part using a router. In my previous video, I was repairing a dresser base, and in order to do that, I needed a part that had been broken. I needed to make a new one. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I went about doing that.
So on the one side, this leg that goes here was broken. It was broken long before we had it. I don't have the piece that goes to it. So I'm gonna take the one from the other side and I'm gonna duplicate it. I don't have a bandsaw or a scroll saw here, so I'm gonna end up using a router, and I'm gonna use the one on the left over here, this one. I'm gonna use it as a pattern.
There are a couple things that you have to consider. One of those is what kind of wood was used on the original part. And do I have access to that wood so I can make a part that's exactly the same? Today, I do not have access to mahogany, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that part with pine. I can always replace this part at a later date. The second thing I need to consider is, how am I going to go about fastening the template or the old part to the board, which will be your new part? In order to do that, I could use screws, I could use a two-sided tape, or I could use a finish nail or a pin nail. I could also use a clamp. With this part in particular, if you were to put a clamp on it, since the part is so small, the clamp would get in the way of the router. So I can't use a clamp. I could use a screw because the part is not going to be very visible since it's in the back of the dresser and it's going to be against the wall. But I'd rather cause as little damage to that part as possible. If I were to use a two-sided tape, it may not be a strong enough bond and that part could pop off of there, which might not be very safe. So I think today I'm going to use a finish nail or two finish nails to hold the template part in place while I route it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it on here in the corner, and I'm going to take these finish nails and I'm just going to go ahead and tack them in here to hold that in place, and then I'm going to run a router around this to copy the part. If I was in the shop, I would use a scroll saw or a bandsaw to cut the part, but I don't have access to those tools right now. So I think this will be the easiest way to pull that off, and it will be an exact copy of that part. So I went ahead and I got these nails started. I tapped it into where it was just poking through, and what I'll do after I get the other one to the same place, I'll line it up and I'll get it perfectly lined up so it's square in the corner, and I'll tap it down into there and I'll hammer it the rest of the way in. So this is just a little trick you can use to use a little pin nail or a finish nail. It can hold it secure for you while you route the part. When I prepare to route this, I'm going to end up using a top end bearing bit. When you hold the router like so, the bearing is in the top end of that bit. So the bearing, which is on the top, is going to glide along that part, and the blade is going to cut into the wood there. I need to be careful when I go by here. I don't want that bearing to go into that hole. Otherwise my part's gonna have a notch in it. I'm not gonna route all the way through with the top end bit. I'm gonna probably just leave like a 1/8 inch or so. And then I'll come back with the bottom end bearing bit, like a trim bit that has a bearing at the bottom side. And I'll flip this board over and route it off. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. So I have this all set up. I went ahead and came outside. I clamped this down with a wood clamp so it's nice and secure, and I'm going to follow around that. Once again, I need to be careful not to go in that hole. I'm not going all the way through, depth-wise. I'm not cutting all the way through it at this point. I was just being really careful the first time by that hole, and so I wanted to make sure it was okay. And you can see it's cut into it about 1/4 inch. Now I'm just going to lower the depth of cut
Probably go another 1/4 inch or so. And now I really have to be careful because that bearing will definitely go in there if I'm not careful. If you're less experienced, it probably would make sense to have a wider based router. I'll take this off, I'll remove the nails, and then I'll flip it over and route what's left. So now I'm going to take the trim bit. It has the bearing on the bottom end of the bit. And this is I'm going to flip this over, I'm going to clamp it down, and I'm going to route inside of here. It's going to go right into that same groove. Even though it's the same size bearing bit, the bearing didn't really want to fit in that slot, which I should have anticipated. Not a big deal. I can use a laminate trim bit with, it doesn't have a bearing. It's like some people call it a pin bit. It just rides along this rounded piece of metal on the end, and that will easily fit in there. When you do that, you want to make sure that the material that's left there is thin enough to fit through that that groove, which it is. So now I have a matching part. I'm just going to take a piece of sandpaper and I'm going to sand that contour where there's burn marks and such, and we'll make it nice and smooth. I've now successfully duplicated this part using a router. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something. Next, check out my 3rd video where I work on the dresser's styles, rails, and inner parts that are damaged. Thanks.